Dark clouds gathered over the life of a young boy named Chinedu Okafor. Before he was old enough to understand the world, death snatched both his parents. Hunger became his closest companion, and the streets of Nigeria became his only home. With a tray of akara balanced on his head, he walked through noisy markets. With an old Okada beneath him, he chased survival. Yet, hidden in this boy's tears, was a destiny too great for anyone to see. This is not a tale of quick success. It is a story where betrayal cuts deeper than knives, where friends turn to enemies, where love becomes poison, and where prison walls threaten to bury a man alive. Still, from the ashes of pain, Chinedu rose. What turned an ordinary Okada rider into a millionaire celebrated across the world? The answer lies in the twists of his unforgettable journey. The story of Chinedu Okafor begins not with laughter, but with loss. As a boy, he stood at the graveside of his parents, watching the earth swallow his only protection. From that moment, life demanded more from him than it should from any child. He hawked akara under the scorching sun, carried loads too heavy for his shoulders, and learned early that tears never put food on the table. The people around him called him cursed, a boy destined to remain poor. But Africa knows how to shape heroes out of hardship. From the dust of the market square to the chaos of prison cells, Chinedu's story carried the voice of destiny. Every setback was a stepping stone, every betrayal was a lesson, and every scar was proof that greatness often hides in suffering. This is not just a Nigerian story, it is an African folktale of pain, survival, and triumph. From the very beginning, life placed a heavy load on the shoulders of Chinedu Okafor. He was barely 10 years old when tragedy struck like a storm at midnight. First, his father, Papa Okafor, a strong farmer with arms hardened by years of tilling the soil, fell ill and died suddenly. Before the family could recover from that wound, his mother, Mama Grace, followed to the grave. The boy who once hid behind his mother's wrapper now stood alone, staring at the red earth that swallowed both his parents. In the silence of the village that day, one question lingered. How can a child carry so much? With no parents to guide him, Chinedu became a wanderer of survival. He carried a tray of akara on his small head, walking from street to street in the scorching sun, calling out, "Hot akara, sweet akara." Sometimes the bean cake sold, sometimes it didn't. On days when nobody bought, he went home empty, and hunger gnawed at his belly like a wild beast. Often he would stand by neighbors' doors, begging for a little food. Many turned him away with cold eyes, some even mocked him, saying, "Go and join your parents in the grave if you are tired of suffering." Those words cut deeper than hunger itself. At night, while other children played under the moonlight, Chinedu sat with an empty plate before him. His body was thin, his ribs visible through his worn shirt, yet his eyes carried a strange fire. He cried quietly into his palms, praying for someone, anyone, to notice his pain. But the village had grown deaf to his tears. He had learned early that tears could not buy bread. Still, he asked himself, why me? Why should a child suffer so much? Dear listener, what would you do if the world placed such a burden on your small shoulders? Would you break, or would you fight? As the years passed, hardship carved its mark on Chinedu's body. His once soft palms grew hard from carrying loads at the market. His feet, bare and cracked, told the story of long journeys in search of work. He begged to wash plates in food stalls, to carry baskets for strangers, and to scrub floors for pennies. Sometimes, after hours of labor, he was driven away without pay. On such nights, he wept bitterly, pressing his face into the dust of the ground. Isn't it true that sometimes life gives you more than you can carry, only to see if you will collapse? The life of Chinedu Okafor entered a new season when he laid down the tray of akara and mounted an old, battered Okada. To him, it was a chance to escape hunger and finally earn steady money. The streets of Port Harcourt became his new workplace. Noisy markets, crowded bus stops, angry drivers, and policemen demanding bribes at every corner. From sunrise to sunset, Chinedu's hands gripped the rusty handlebars while his back bent under the weight of survival. Every naira he earned was quickly swallowed by rent, food, and debts. Yet as he rode, he carried in his heart the silent hope that maybe, just maybe, life would finally show him mercy. But mercy did not come. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled and the streets turned slippery, disaster struck. A speeding car ran into Chinedu's Okada, flinging him across the road like a rag doll. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Bones cracked, blood spilled, and passers-by gathered, whispering, "This poor boy again." Instead of helping, many walked away, shaking their heads. That night, Chinedu lay in a hospital bed, his body broken, his future uncertain. The bills piled higher than the mountains, and no friend or relative came forward. Only his little sister Nkechi sat by his bedside, her small hands clutching his, crying, "Brother, please don't die, please." Day after day, nurses threatened to throw him out for unpaid bills. Chinedu wept silently. He begged from his hospital bed, "Please help me, I don't want to die here." But no one listened. Not even his so-called friends who once promised they would never leave him. Even his girlfriend Ifeoma, who once swore eternal love, stopped visiting. The weight of betrayal pressed on him heavier than his broken bones. Still, Nkechi never left. Each day, she returned with swollen eyes, kneeling by his bed, whispering prayers that heaven seemed too silent to answer. Then, when all hope seemed lost, destiny walked into the ward. A good Samaritan, an elderly man whose son Chinedu had once helped at the market, appeared. Touched by the sight of the young boy's suffering and his sister's tears, the man cleared the hospital bills without asking for anything in return. For the first time in weeks, Chinedu smiled through his pain, whispering, "God has not forgotten me." Treated and discharged, he limped out of the hospital, still weak but alive. But poverty does not give long holidays. His body had not fully healed, yet hunger forced him back into the saddle of another Okada. This time, the Okada was not his. It belonged to a man who gave it to him on hire purchase, expecting daily returns. Each morning, even with pain shooting through his legs and back, Chinedu dragged himself onto the motorbike, because missing a day's payment meant losing his only chance at survival. Sometimes he returned late, bruised and exhausted, handing over almost all his earnings. What remained was barely enough to buy food for himself and his sister. It was a cruel cycle: work, pain, pay, hunger, repeat, and yet he endured. Isn't it strange how life forces the poor to keep giving even when they have nothing left? The streets gave him little comfort. Police officers stopped him, demanding bribes. Passengers insulted him if he asked for fair payment. Some days he went home empty, staring at Nkechi with shame in his eyes. On those nights, he cried in silence, burying his face in his pillow so his sister would not hear. But children notice everything. One evening, Nkechi placed her tiny hands on his shoulder and said, "Brother, one day, all this will end. One day, you will not suffer anymore." Those words, though spoken by a child, became his strength. But just when it seemed things might get better, another betrayal crept in. Friends who had once sworn to support him now mocked him, laughing at his patched clothes and worn slippers. Some said to his face, "Chinedu, you will ride Okada until your bones rot." Their words stung like knives. And Ifeoma, the girl who once vowed to love him forever, walked away from his side, choosing a richer man. Alone, rejected, and bruised from both life and love, Chinedu still clung to one truth: he was not born to die in poverty. The road of suffering took a darker turn for Chinedu Okafor one hot afternoon when police sirens roared and officers dragged him from his Okada. They accused him of a theft he had never committed. Before he could explain, their boots and batons rained down on him. Blow after blow fell until blood ran from his nose and his back felt like fire. Passers-by watched from a distance, whispering, but no one dared to help. By the time the police dumped him at the station, his body was so battered that when Nkechi, his little sister, came and saw him, she almost fainted on the spot. "Brother, brother," she cried, but the iron doors shut behind him, swallowing her screams. Inside the cell, the smell of sweat and urine choked him. His body begged for treatment, but none came. He was thrown into the darkness without trial, without a chance to defend himself, his innocence buried under the weight of a corrupt system. Many nights, Chinedu sat on the cold floor, his tears mixing with the dust as he whispered, "God, please, don't forget me." Yet heaven seemed silent. His cries went unanswered, and his chains grew heavier with each passing day. Outside those walls, life was no kinder to his sister. Nkechi, who once clung to him for strength, now found herself alone. Their little hut, already weak and cracked, was demolished by the government in a sweeping eviction. With no roof over her head, she wandered the streets. When she sought shelter with neighbors, they shut their doors. "Stay away from us," they hissed. "You and your brother are cursed." Hungry and homeless, she grew weaker by the day until sickness overtook her. She lay by the roadside, shivering and coughing, her small body crying out for care that never came. Once, Ifeoma, the girl who had once promised to stand with Chinedu, visited him at the police station. Her face was painted with pity, her voice soft, but her eyes already belonged to another man. "I will try to come back," she said. But that was the last time he saw her. Her absence cut like a knife, but Chinedu had no strength left to hate. Betrayal had become too familiar, too heavy. Meanwhile, his sister lay dying. Word reached one kind-hearted policeman, Officer Bala, a man whose conscience had not been sold to corruption. When he saw little Nkechi at death's door, he took pity. Though poor himself, he gathered money with the help of a church nearby and sent her to the hospital. There, she was treated until she finally recovered, though her heart longed for her brother, trapped in prison walls. Chinedu never knew of this at first. He only kept weeping in the cell, thinking his sister was gone forever. Back inside, his bruises never healed properly. He sat among hardened criminals, mocked and beaten for his weakness. Each night, he folded his arms around his knees and asked, "Why, Lord? Why should I suffer for what I did not do? Have you closed your ears against me?" Silence was his only reply. The sound of chains rattling and men groaning became his lullaby. And yet, deep inside, a stubborn fire refused to die. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to months. Though Officer Bala quietly told him, "I know you're not guilty, but this country's system is broken," the chains remained. Injustice had locked him where truth could not set him free. His heart ached not only for himself, but for his little sister, whom he feared would not survive without him. He dreamt of her each night, saw her face in his sleep, and woke with tears in his eyes. The prison walls had almost swallowed Chinedu Okafor, but destiny was not done shaping him. While he was locked behind bars, surrounded by men hardened by crime, he crossed paths with Tunde Williams, the son of a wealthy businessman. Tunde had been arrested after a nightclub brawl, and because of his privileged background, many of the inmates saw him as an easy target. One night, when fists and knives rose against Tunde, it was Chinedu who stepped forward. With courage he did not know he had, he shielded the young man, fought off the attackers, and saved him from disgrace. But in doing so, he painted a mark on his own back. The inmates whispered, planned, and promised revenge. When Tunde's father finally secured his release, Chinedu was left alone among bitter men who wanted blood. Days later, they struck. In the chaos of the cell, Chinedu was stabbed in the side and blood flowed from his wound like water from a broken calabash. He staggered, gasping for air, and fell to the floor as laughter echoed around him. The prison guards turned their eyes away, but one man could not. Officer Bala, the same policeman who once helped his sister, rushed to his side. With urgency and compassion, Bala smuggled in a nurse who cleaned the wound and tied bandages around his frail body. Chinedu lived, but every breath became a battle against pain. Weeks passed. His body was weak, yet his spirit clung to life. Then one day, fate moved in a way no one expected. On social media, a story broke. A poor inmate stabbed and left to die in prison. Tunde, the rich man's son, saw the post. His heart tightened when he recognized the face of the man who had defended him in the darkest night. Without hesitation, he turned to his father. "Papa, this man saved my life. If not for him, I would not be standing here today." The old man, Chief Williams, who had once dismissed poor men like flies, felt sympathy. For the first time, his heart softened. Days later, the paperwork was signed, and Chinedu walked out of prison gates, free at last. Freedom tasted sweet, but it came with a price. With nowhere to go, Chinedu followed Tunde home, and soon Chief Williams offered him a job as a gateman in their mansion. To outsiders, it was a lowly position, but to Chinedu, it was salvation. Every day, he stood tall in his uniform, greeting visitors, opening gates, and watching life from behind the iron bars. The family grew fond of him. His loyalty and humility won their respect. Even Chief Williams, once skeptical, often nodded at him with hidden admiration. For the first time in years, Chinedu felt like he belonged somewhere. But life has a way of testing hearts when peace begins to settle. It was in that compound that Chinedu grew close to Ada Williams, Tunde's younger sister. At first, it was innocent, friendly greetings at the gate, a smile exchanged, and a short conversation here and there. She admired his discipline, his strength, and the quiet way he carried himself. But Ada's admiration soon turned into desire. One evening, when the house was quiet, she tried to pull him into her arms. Chinedu stepped back, shaking his head. "No, Ada, this cannot happen. I respect your family too much." Rejected, her pride burnt hotter than fire. Within days, a lie was born. She accused Chinedu of forcing himself on her. The mansion that once felt like a refuge became a place of shame. Chief Williams, torn between the word of his daughter and the boy who saved his son, could not take the risk of scandal. With heavy words, he told Chinedu to leave. Tears filled Chinedu's eyes as he fell on his knees. "Sir, I did not do this. Please believe me. Please, don't send me away." But his words fell on deaf ears. With his wound still aching, he packed his few belongings and walked out. His heart broken, his dignity crushed. For 3 long days, Chinedu camped at the gate of the mansion. He sat on the bare ground, waiting, hoping the truth would speak for him. Sun scorched him by day, cold bit him by night, yet he refused to leave. The guards tried to chase him, neighbors mocked him, but he held on, whispering to himself, "Maybe tomorrow they will believe me." By the 3rd day, reality dawned. No one came. Not Chief Williams, not Tunde, not even Ada with her guilty conscience. With slow steps and tears streaming down his face, he finally turned his back on the house that once sheltered him. And so, Chinedu entered the streets again, carrying nothing but scars, betrayal, and a fragile hope. His freedom had come at a price: pain, rejection, and shame. But unknown to him, this painful exit was not the end. It was the beginning of another chapter that would test his will to survive and shape the man he was destined to become. When Chinedu Okafor was cast out of the mansion of Chief Williams, he walked into the night with nothing but his tears. The world outside was merciless. No roof waited for him, no family opened their doors, no friend called his name. His only companion was the weight of betrayal pressing on his shoulders. For many nights, he wandered the streets like a man cursed. Sometimes he slept under bridges, the roar of cars above him like drums of sorrow. Other times he found shelter in uncompleted buildings, where cold winds bit his skin and mosquitoes feasted on his flesh. His body was alive, but his soul felt buried. Hunger was his fiercest enemy. Days would pass without food, his stomach groaning like a drum of emptiness. When he had no strength left, he searched dustbins, picking at discarded leftovers. Once he found a half-eaten piece of bread smeared with sand, and tears rolled down his cheeks as he ate it like a feast. The same people who once shared his laughter now crossed the street to avoid him. His clothes, never replaced, tore until they hung in rags. His slippers broke, and his hair grew wild. At times, he caught his reflection in the glass of a shop window and wondered, "Do I look like a madman now?" The police too became a constant shadow. One night, as he dozed beneath the bridge, a patrol team dragged him up roughly. "You are one of the armed robbers disturbing this area," they barked. Fear gripped him like chains. He tried to explain, but his voice cracked. They tied his hands and marched him to the station. Just as despair swallowed him, a familiar face appeared, Officer Bala, the same man who had once helped his sister and nursed his wounds in prison. Bala stepped forward and said, "No, I know this young man. He is not a thief." With a wave of his hand, the officers released Chinedu. That night, he wept, not from pain, but from gratitude. But how long can gratitude feed an empty stomach? The days grew harsher. He owned nothing but the rags on his back. When rain poured, he shivered in the cold. When the sun blazed, he burned. At night, rats crawled around him, nibbling at crumbs from the trash he scavenged. Yet in all this misery, he never stopped crying to God. "Father, please," he prayed, his voice breaking in the darkness. "If you still see me, if you still hear me, send me help. Do not let me die like this." He had no way of finding his sister Nkechi. No phone, no address, no one to ask. In his lowest moments, he feared she was dead, just as his parents were. Loneliness ate him alive. There were nights he held himself tightly, rocking back and forth, whispering her name, wishing he could hear her voice one more time. But silence was his answer. Silence, and the sound of his tears hitting the cold concrete where he slept. One morning, a group of children walked past him on their way to school. They pointed at him, giggling, "Look at the madman." He turned away, shame burning his chest. But that same shame hardened into determination. "I am not mad," he told himself. "I will not die here. This is not my end." It was not pride speaking, it was the faint flame of hope that refused to go out, even when life poured buckets of sorrow over it. Still, the suffering dragged on. Day after day, he searched for odd jobs, carrying loads, sweeping, cleaning, anything. But most people pushed him away, his torn clothes and sunken eyes betraying his hunger. And yet, each rejection, each insult, each empty night under the bridge shaped him. In his prayers and his tears, he found a strength that was invisible to the world but alive within him. It was the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose, except his will to rise. On the edge of despair, when all hope seemed lost, Chinedu Okafor lay by the roadside like a man abandoned by the world. Dust clung to his torn clothes, his stomach groaned with hunger, and his eyes, sunken from sleepless nights, stared into nothingness. Passers-by stepped around him, shaking their heads, some even whispering, "Look at the madman." He wanted to rise, but his body refused. He whispered one more prayer, weak and trembling, "God, if you still see me, please don't let me die like this." And then destiny moved. A black SUV slowed beside him. The window rolled down and out stepped Tunde Williams, the rich man's son he once saved in prison. At first, Chinedu thought he was dreaming, but when Tunde rushed to his side, calling his name, he knew this was real. "Chinedu, is this you?" Tunde's voice shook. Chinedu, too weak to stand, managed a faint nod. Without hesitation, Tunde knelt and hugged him tightly, not minding the dirt, not minding the rags. It was a hug that spoke of gratitude, of memory, and of hope. "Come with me," Tunde said firmly. He helped him into the car and drove him to a restaurant. There, for the first time in months, Chinedu sat at a table with real food before him. Rice, meat, water. The smell alone brought tears to his eyes. As he ate, he wept openly. Between bites, he explained again the truth. That he never touched Ada, that the accusation was a lie that destroyed him. Tunde placed his hand on his shoulder and said softly, "I believe you, my brother. I know you could never do such a thing." Those words, simple yet powerful, lifted a weight from Chinedu's heart. After the meal, Tunde bought him new clothes, neat and clean. He took him to a small bachelor house and paid the rent up front. Then, placing a wad of notes in his hand, Tunde said, "Here is 10,000. It is small, but it is a start. Use it well." At that moment, Chinedu could no longer hold himself. He fell on his knees, tears streaming down his face, and cried, "Thank you, God. Thank you, my brother. May heaven reward you." Tunde lifted him up, hugged him once more, and promised, "Your story is not over. Rise again." With that, he left. That night, Chinedu sat alone in the bachelor house. The walls were bare, the floor cold, yet his heart was overflowing. He spread the money before him, knelt and prayed with all his soul. "God, you have answered me. Tell me what to do with this. Show me the way." And as he drifted into sleep, he had a dream. In the dream, he stood in a market with bags of pure water by his side, shouting, "Buy water, buy water." And people came crowding around, buying from him until the bags were finished. He woke with tears on his face and whispered, "Lord, I understand. This is what I must do." The next morning, without hesitation, Chinedu took the money and bought one bag of pure water. He balanced it on his head and walked to Mile 3 Market, calling out to thirsty traders. At first, some mocked him. A grown man selling water? But hunger speaks louder than shame. Before the afternoon sun reached its peak, the bag was empty, sold out. For the first time, he held profit in his hand, small but real. He bought another bag, then another. Slowly, something inside him stirred. Hope. Day after day, he returned to the market, sweating under the sun, shouting until his throat went dry. From one bag, he moved to 2. From 2 to 5. He saved every naira, refusing to waste a single coin. The same boy who once ate from trash now stood in the market as a seller, not a beggar. People began to notice his persistence. Some encouraged him, others mocked, but Chinedu pressed on. His torn rags were gone, replaced with clean clothes. His face, once marked by despair, now carried a glow of purpose. And yet, though joy began to grow, pain still lingered. As he worked, he remembered the nights under the bridge, the hunger, the shame, the lies that destroyed him. Sometimes he cried quietly while selling, tears mixing with sweat. But each tear was no longer a cry of hopelessness, it was a seed of gratitude. "Lord," he whispered, "thank you for turning my sorrow into something. I will not waste this chance." From 1 bag to 2, from 2 to 5, Chinedu Okafor worked the markets until his voice became known to traders. Sweat dripped down his face, but money slowly filled his pocket. Each profit he made, he saved carefully. The business grew like a small seed watered by pain and determination. Before long, people began to seek him out, not just to buy water for themselves, but to resell. His hustle grew into a network. He was no longer just a hawker, he was becoming a supplier. Soon, the profits gave him a bold idea. With courage in his heart, Chinedu decided to invest in treated bottled water, something few believed he could manage. He purchased a sealing machine, cleaned his small parlor, and turned it into a humble factory. Now, alongside pure water sachets, bottles filled with fresh, clean water rolled out of his one-bedroom apartment. He worked day and night, cutting expenses, reinvesting every coin. Slowly, people noticed the quality. Demand soared. What began as survival was turning into a brand. By this time, Chinedu had moved out of the bachelor house. The one-bedroom apartment was small, but to him it was a palace. The parlor doubled as his office, warehouse, and production floor. His neighbors often mocked the noise of sealing machines, but he smiled, for he knew greatness was being born. On his back was the memory of hunger, under bridges and in trash heaps. That memory drove him like fire. He told himself every morning, "Never again will I beg. Never again will I sleep on the street." And then, destiny gave him a gift he did not expect. One afternoon, while delivering bottled water to a client, he passed a small provision shop. Outside, a young girl sat quietly, her head bent in thought. Something in her posture caught his attention. He slowed, looked again, and his heart pounded. Could it be? His voice trembled as he shouted, "Nkechi." At first, the girl did not respond. She looked up with confusion. How could this clean, confident young man be calling her? But as he drew closer, his eyes filled with tears. "It's me, your brother. It's Chinedu." For a moment, silence ruled. Then recognition struck her like thunder. Nkechi leapt from her chair and ran into his arms. She wept uncontrollably, her tears wetting his shoulder. "Brother, is it really you? I thought I lost you forever." Chinedu held her tightly, his body shaking with joy. "No, my sister, God kept me alive. God brought us back together." People passing by stopped, touched by the scene. Even her boss, standing in the doorway, watched in surprise. Chinedu turned to him and declared, "This is my sister. From today, she will not work for you anymore. She is coming with me." Back at his small apartment, Chinedu told her everything about prison, betrayal, hunger, and how God lifted him through the pure water business. Nkechi wept as she listened, but her tears were no longer of sorrow. They were tears of thanksgiving. She hugged him again, whispering, "God has remembered us." For the first time since childhood, Chinedu felt whole. The loneliness that haunted him for years vanished in that embrace. From that day forward, Nkechi became his partner. He taught her the trade, showed her how to keep records, and soon entrusted her with the role of supervisor. She handled orders, organized workers, and kept the business running whenever he went to supply. Together, they built not just a company, but a family restored. The house that once echoed with machines now echoed with laughter, hope, and dreams of a brighter tomorrow. And as the weeks passed, success continued to knock. Contracts began to come. People who once mocked him now stretched their hands for his services. His bottled water brand spread beyond Mile 3 Market, reaching schools, shops, and construction companies. But even as money entered his hands, Chinedu never forgot the tears that watered his journey. Each time he held a contract paper, he whispered, "Lord, this is your doing." The true breakthrough came one blazing afternoon when a construction company, impressed by his persistence and product, signed a contract with Chinedu Okafor to supply bottled water to their workers. What began with 1 bag on his head now grew into truckloads of water rolling out daily. From that single contract, others followed. Schools, hotels, and shops lined up for his services. Within months, Chinedu moved from a struggling trader to a recognized businessman. His name echoed across the city as the boy who rose from the ashes. He was no longer just surviving, he was becoming a millionaire. When Tunde Williams, the rich man's son, visited his new office, pride filled his eyes. He hugged Chinedu warmly and said, "I told you, your story was not over." The two men laughed, remembering the cold prison walls where their bond first began. To Tunde, Chinedu was not just a friend but a brother. proof that true greatness is born in fire. Yet, destiny had another twist waiting. One evening, Ada Williams, the same daughter who once accused him of rape, walked into his office with tears streaming down her face. "Chinedu, forgive me," she whispered. "I was wrong. Please, I want to be part of your life again." For a moment, silence filled the room. The man who once slept under bridges and ate from trash now stood above the woman who once destroyed him. He looked into her trembling eyes and said, "Ada, I forgave you long ago, but I cannot love you again. My heart has moved on." With those words, he ended the chapter of betrayal without bitterness. Ada wept, ashamed, while Chinedu turned back to his desk, his face calm. He had learned that true power was not in revenge, but in mercy. And from that day, his empire grew even greater, built not only on water, but also on wisdom carved from suffering. Success came like a flood, sweeping through every corner of Chinedu Okafor's life. The boy who once hawked akara and slept under bridges now graced the pages of Forbes Magazine as one of Africa's most influential entrepreneurs. The story of his rise, from an Okada rider to a millionaire, was told across nations, inspiring millions. Photographers flashed their cameras, journalists begged for interviews, and his face appeared on billboards. Chinedu's name was no longer just spoken in markets, it was written in history. But his influence did not stop there. His business empire grew beyond imagination. From supplying bottled water to small shops, he expanded until he became the major supplier of water to the federal government of Nigeria. With trust came greater opportunities. Contracts poured in, not only in water but in building schools, hospitals, and roads. He started multiple NGOs, feeding orphans, supporting widows, and offering scholarships to struggling students. His fleet of cars filled garages, his mansions stood tall in cities, and one street even bore his name. He was no longer just successful. He was a symbol of African greatness, celebrated not only in Nigeria but across the world. Yet, even with wealth flowing like rivers, Chinedu never forgot the dust of his past. He poured millions into charity, building homes for the homeless and feeding those who once mocked him. Relatives who had abandoned him now crawled back, begging for recognition. Some came with tears, others with excuses. Chinedu welcomed them with grace, though deep inside, he remembered their rejection. "I will not treat them the way they treated me," he said quietly. "Let my life be a lesson that pain should not turn to bitterness." His humility touched hearts, and the nation hailed him as both a businessman and a philanthropist. But behind the smiling photographs and golden headlines, cracks began to show. Chinedu had married a working-class woman, Amaka, who at first appeared strong and supportive. She stood by him at public events, dressed in elegance, smiling for cameras. To the world, they looked like the perfect couple. But in the silence of their home, another truth lived. Amaka did not love Chinedu. She loved his money. Whenever he traveled for business, whispers filled the air. She entertained other men, laughing and flirting in his absence. And when she took in a child, joy filled Chinedu's heart at first, until suspicion crept in. His success had given him everything he ever dreamed of, but also a gnawing emptiness. Quietly, without telling anyone, he ordered a DNA test for the child he had raised with pride. The result came like a sword through his chest. The boy was not his. Chinedu sat alone in his mansion that night, the same hands that once carried trays of akara, now trembling as they held the report. Tears filled his eyes, but this time they were not tears of poverty. They were tears of betrayal. He had built empires, but he could not build love. In public, he remained the shining star. He gave speeches, signed contracts, and smiled for the world. But in private, his nights were sleepless. He sat in his study, staring at the walls, asking himself, why is my story always written with tears? Why does betrayal follow me, even at the peak of success? His wealth could buy fleets of cars, but it could not buy loyalty. It could build schools and hospitals, but it could not build a faithful marriage. The irony was cruel. A man who once prayed under bridges for survival now had more than enough to feed nations. Yet the very heart he longed to trust was pierced by lies. He watched Amaka smile at him with lips that had kissed another. He watched his child play, knowing the blood in those veins was not his own. And he carried the pain silently, because the world could not understand how a man so blessed could still feel so broken. He tried to drown himself in work, in contracts, in philanthropy. He went back to school, completing a degree in business administration, then a master's. He told himself knowledge would heal the wounds that money could not. But no certificate erased the betrayal, and no applause silenced the pain. His millions became meaningless in those moments when he lay awake at night, staring into the darkness, whispering, "God, why does joy always carry sorrow beside it?" Behind the glass walls of his mansions and the flashing lights of his fame, Chinedu Okafor carried a loneliness money could not erase. He had wealth, power, and influence. Yet each night, when the laughter of his staff and associates faded, he sat alone in silence. The sound of his own breathing became his companion. He was celebrated everywhere, yet he felt unknown in his own home. His wife's distant eyes and cold touch reminded him that love had slipped through his fingers long ago. Even the child he once thought his own was not of his blood. The applause of the world could not drown out the emptiness eating at his soul. Then, one afternoon, while speaking at a prestigious conference in Washington, D.C., life struck again. In the middle of his presentation, he suddenly clutched his chest, staggered, and collapsed before the crowd. At first, many thought it was exhaustion or stress. But when doctors rushed him to the hospital, tests revealed the truth: cancer. A disease hidden inside him, growing quietly while he built empires. When his wife arrived at the hospital, she put on a mask of concern, but in her heart, she whispered a darker prayer. She wished him death, because his wealth had become her only desire. The news of his diagnosis made her lips curl into a secret smile instead of tears. Chinedu was flown back to Nigeria for treatment. The government offered help, but he refused, choosing to suffer quietly. His illness was kept a secret from the public, hidden even from close associates and business partners. Only two people knew the full truth: his loyal sister, Nkechi, and his faithful friend, Tunde Williams. They were by his side day and night, wiping his sweat, praying over him, and feeding him when his strength failed. While the world praised his name in headlines, he coughed in silence, his body shrinking, his skin turning pale. The man who once signed contracts worth millions now needed help to stand. In the dim light of his hospital room, Chinedu often stared at the ceiling, reflecting on his journey. He remembered hawking akara as a boy, sleeping under bridges, and begging God for survival. He remembered the betrayals, the hunger, and the lies that nearly broke him. He remembered the joy of reuniting with his sister, the pride of his first business, and the laughter with Tunde. And then he thought of the cruel irony, that after climbing from the gutter to the peak of success, he was now laid low by an enemy his money could not defeat. "So this is life," he whispered, tears filling his eyes, "a journey of mountains and valleys." But the deepest wound was not in his body. It was in his heart. His wife, who should have been his comfort, had betrayed him with other men. He discovered that while he was away for treatment, she had been entertaining lovers, wasting his wealth without shame. And when she stood by his bed, she pretended to love. Yet her heart longed for his death, so she could inherit all he had built. This knowledge broke him more than cancer itself. He often turned his face to the wall so she would not see his tears. "I gave her everything," he murmured. "Why has love always denied me?" But in the shadows of betrayal, one light remained: his sister, Nkechi. She never left his side. Day after day, she read scriptures to him, cooked his meals, and whispered prayers into his ears when he was too weak to speak. Sometimes he reached for her hand and said, "You are my true family. You are the reason I am not afraid to go." And Tunde, the rich man's son, visited often, bringing laughter, reminding him of their days in prison. Together, they tried to lift his spirit. But nothing could change the truth. Death was already knocking. As his condition worsened, Chinedu began to put his affairs in order. He refused to let the woman who betrayed him touch his legacy. Quietly, he wrote his will. To the shock of many, he left everything: his businesses, his houses, his fortune, not to his wife, but to Nkechi, his loyal sister. "She was with me when I had nothing," he told his lawyer. "She will carry my name when I am gone." His decision was final. For a man who had suffered betrayal at every stage of life, trust was sacred, and only his sister had earned it. In his last days, Chinedu looked out of the hospital window at the Lagos skyline. He saw the roads he had built, the schools he had funded, and the hospitals he had donated to. His heart swelled with pride and sorrow. I gave everything to my people, he thought, but who gave me love? Tears rolled down his cheeks. The boy who once cried for food was now a man crying for something greater: peace of heart. In the final days of his life, Chinedu Okafor carried not only the pain of cancer, but also the invisible wound of betrayal. The heartbreak from his wife, who had loved only his wealth and betrayed his trust, gnawed at his spirit until it shortened the little time he had left. Though he smiled for his sister Nkechi and his loyal friend Tunde, deep inside he was tired. Tired of fighting battles with poverty, tired of fighting battles with love, and now, tired of fighting for his very breath. One sad evening, as the sun dipped behind the Lagos skyline, Chinedu sat alone on his couch, sipping a glass of wine. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the presence of death itself. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a moment, and whispered, "Lord, I am ready." But before the words could settle, his body went limp. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, and he collapsed. Rushed to the hospital, he fought for 6 long hours before cancer claimed its final victory. When the doctor walked out and announced his death, the world lost a giant, but heaven gained a weary soul. News of his passing spread like wildfire. From Mile 3 Market to the corridors of power, people mourned the boy who rose from an Okada rider to a billionaire philanthropist. His community wept, the poor he had fed cried openly, and widows and orphans knelt in prayer for the man who had been their hope. Even governments across Africa sent messages of condolence. The newspapers read, "The end of a legend." But while the world celebrated his legacy, his household became a battlefield of greed and sorrow. After his burial, his wife Amaka revealed her true colors. Believing she and her son would inherit everything, she tried to send Nkechi away. "This house and everything in it belongs to my son," she declared. Nkechi wept silently, her heart already broken from the loss of her brother. She feared she would be cast into the same life of poverty they once escaped. But a week later, the family lawyer arrived with an envelope and thick files in hand. Amaka tried to stop him, insisting there was no need. But he looked her in the eye and said firmly, this was Chinedu's last wish. His will must be read. The room fell silent as the lawyer opened the envelope. Inside was not only Chinedu's will, but also the DNA result he had secretly obtained before his death. The lawyer cleared his throat and read aloud, "To my wife, Amaka, I leave the current house she lives in and provision for her son. But all other assets, businesses, houses, contracts, and global investments, I hereby leave to my sister, Nkechi Okafor." A gasp filled the room. Nkechi collapsed in tears, overwhelmed. She had thought her suffering would return after her brother's death, but in that moment, she realized he had made her the heir of everything. Then came another revelation. Alongside the will was a handwritten letter addressed to Amaka. In it, Chinedu's voice spoke from beyond the grave. "Amaka, I knew of your betrayals. I knew the child was not mine. I chose to keep it quiet because bitterness is a prison, and I have lived in enough prisons for one lifetime. I forgive you. You may go on with your life, but know this. Everything I built belongs to Nkechi, the one who never left me. I wish you well, but my heart is free of you." Amaka trembled as the words were read, her face pale with shock. Her dream of inheriting wealth turned into ashes in her hands. She had gained nothing but shame, while Nkechi, still mourning, suddenly carried the weight of her brother's empire. She was named CEO of his companies, leader of his foundations, and heir to his vision. Yet even in her triumph, her tears did not stop. For what is wealth without the brother who bled to earn it? And so, the story of Chinedu Okafor ended not with happily ever after, but with the bittersweet truth of life. He rose from nothing, gave everything, and died with betrayal still haunting his heart. His legacy echoed across Africa, inspiring millions but also warning them, greatness is born in pain, yet true wealth is not money. It is loyalty, truth, and love. Dear listener, let this story linger in your heart. What good is success if your soul is empty? What good is wealth if love is a lie? The life of Chinedu teaches us that no matter how far we rise, what matters most are those who stand with us in truth. This has been another tale from African Folktales by Lawrence James. If this story moved you, do not forget to subscribe so you never miss the next journey into the heart of our people's stories. Watch out for the next tale. It may change the way you see life forever.